Hello and welcome to our revisions session for Religious Studies AS, and we will be looking at an aspect of the philosophy module in this presentation. So today we will be looking at the response to the problem of evil and suffering, and we will be looking at the Augustinian Theodicy. Our aims today are to just try and make sure that you have understood the theodicy and trying to reinforce your knowledge and your understanding of how Augustine responds to the problem of evil and suffering, and try and look at some of the main arguments that you could use in an evaluation question on this topic. First of all, let us have a look at what the specification expects you to know about the Augustinian theodicy. So first of all, looking at evil as a consequence of sin, evil as privation, the fall of human beings and creation as a whole, and the idea of the cross overcoming evil. Looking at soul deciding, and then we will move on to looking at the challenges to the theodicy. So they have actually listed there some of the arguments that you should be able to discuss in an answer on the challenges to the theodicy. So this would be an example of a question that would address this topic. Explain how Augustinian type theodicies offer a solution to the problem of evil. If you have a look at the question, Augustinian type is any theodicy that follows the Augustinian theodicy. If there are any modern versions, then they would fall within the Augustinian type. And how do they offer a solution and then to the problem of evil? Okay, so if we are meant to be discussing and looking at the response to the problem of evil, you need to make sure that you've understood the problem of evil and suffering for religious believers. There is a presentation online specifically on the problem of evil, and if you have watched it, could you actually explain what the problem of evil and suffering is for religious believers? So pause the presentation and see if you can explain what the problem of evil and suffering is for religious believers. So what we mean by the problem of evil and suffering, as you may remember, is that the characteristics that you see in the red font are all characteristics of the God that could be seen within Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. An all-loving, all-powerful, all-present, all-knowing God, a creator. He's known as the Father, and he's a righteous, he's a good God, and he's always fair. If you actually believe in this kind of God, as you would see within Christianity, then really there shouldn't be any evil or suffering in the world. A God of this type would stop the evil and suffering, or would not have created it in the first place. As a father, he would want to look after us and would not want to see us suffer at all. So this is what we mean by the problem of evil and suffering. So what Augustine does is he tries and respond to this problem of evil and suffering. So the philosophers that you were supposed to mention in your work on the problem of evil would have been Epicurus, Mackey, William Rowe, and Gregory Paul. Those are the main philosophers within the course that identified the problem of evil and suffering. So now we will look at how Augustine has actually tried to answer some of these problems. So, how does Augustine respond to the problem of evil and suffering? Where does evil and suffering come from? If we see that evil and suffering is in the world, where, according to Augustine, does evil and suffering come from? If you have studied the Augustinian Theodicy, then you could pause the presentation now and try and answer the 5 questions in the red font on the screen. What is the meaning of theodicy? Can you explain what the word means? Where did evil and suffering come from? You should be able to mention and refer to the fall, free will, and the idea of inheriting evil and suffering. Why, according to Augustine, is evil and suffering in the world? Does evil actually exist? The idea of privation, and does God give an opportunity to improve the situation through the cross? So pause the presentation and try and answer these questions. Okay, so let's move on to look at the Augustinian Theodicy. So first of all, who was Augustine? He's a philosopher, a Christian thinker, a long time ago. You can see the dates there, 354 AD. He was a bishop in North Africa. So obviously as a Christian, he wanted to try and defend God. And that's exactly what theodicy means. It may be a new word for you. So theodicy, as you can see here, I've given a definition here. A theodicy is an argument that tries to defend God in the face of evil and suffering. So he's trying to answer the accusations of the philosophers and the thinkers who I have identified the problem of evil and suffering. So within his theodicy, there are several arguments that he tries to actually put forward. So we will look at some of the main arguments that he has included in his theodicy. So we'll be looking at the Augustinian theodicy and looking at is it a solution to the problem of evil and suffering? So as you can see, the Augustinian theodicy is based and is also known as an soul deciding theodicy. And this links to the fall of humanity. You see the illustration there of the fall of humanity and the idea of free will, which I'm sure is a concept that you are aware of. The decisions, the freedom to make our own decisions, be they good, be they be good or be bad. The first part of Augustine's theodicy is a part where he tries to address where moral evil comes from. And within this part of the theodicy, he refers to the fall of mankind and the idea of free will. So, as you can see from the illustration, I'm sure that you are aware of the narrative in Genesis in the Bible of Adam and Eve turning away from God, um, taking the fruit from the tree of knowledge, even though that God has instructed them not to. They use their own freedom to actually take the fruit. They were tempted by the serpent, and they ate the fruit from the tree. This freedom to go and disobey God is known as free will. It's a concept within Christianity that God had to give us free will to make our own choices to see if we deserve to be rewarded in heaven or not. This is WJEC's definition of free will, the ability to make decisions that are not dictated by prior causes or by divine intervention. We are not puppets or God's robots. We don't have to perform in the way that God wants us to do. He's given us the laws and the commandments in the Bible of how to act as good citizens, but he has also given us the freedom to follow them or to turn away from God and his rules. So let's look at the concepts of the fall and free will in a bit more detail. So first of all, according to Augustine, the world was created with no evil. It was a perfect world. There was no bad, no evil in the world. Everything was meant to be good. So if you are aware of and you know about the creation narrative in the Bible, um, at the end of each day of creation, God looks at what he created on that day and says that everything was good or very good. And he does not say that anything is bad. So it must have been a good world. So evil comes into existence when angels and human beings, so Adam and Eve, misused their free will, their freedom, and turned against God as their creator. So they willingly go against what he commanded them to not do. So to turn against God is to use their free will. So they took the fruit from the tree. So it's a decision that they made to do less good than more good, which in turn causes evil. So this is where evil came. They came from Adam and Eve eating the fruit and disobeying God. And because of that, they were made to suffer. They were punished for disobeying God, and they were made to suffer. Things that I'm sure you know, that they were thrown out of paradise, the idea that they had to work, and the idea that we have to die. These are all punishments for disobeying God's commandment within the story. So that is where evil and suffering comes from. Augustine admits that the willingness of the angels and the humans to do evil is still a great mystery to our understanding. So because of our free will, people are responsible for the sins. Um, it's not God's fault. We decide to do bad things. Therefore, this results in evil and suffering. So the reason for this is that human beings have chosen to sin completely voluntarily because of their free will. So basically, it's people's fault. It's not God's fault. So let's move to the second part of Augustine's Theodicy, the idea of privation. Privation means the absence of something. You are deprived of something. So basically, he says that the evil and suffering in the world is the absence of good in the world. Think of it this way. What would you call the absence of light? When there is no light, we would label it as darkness. The absence of something sweet, we would say that that food would be sour. The absence of goodness, then we would label that as evil. Therefore, evil is an absence of goodness. Augustine is famous for his words saying that there is no evil, only no good. So let us look at the idea of privation in a bit more detail. So privation, as I said in the previous slide, is the absence of good. So according to Augustine, God has created a beautiful and a good world. It's a perfect, nice, good world. So God has created goodness, and when goodness is not evident, when we don't see goodness in the world, we call it evil. So absence of good is what we call evil. So God has created goodness, but when it's not evident in the world, we label those events as bad or as evil. The lack of goodness in the world is what we call evil. Therefore, God has created goodness. When there is no goodness, the deprivation of goodness appears. We are deprived of goodness. So that would be what we call evil. So there is no evil. He denies that God has created evil. What we call evil is the absence of good. That when there is no good happening, we call that evil. God created good, not evil. It is the absence of good. So then the Theodicy moves on to look and try and discuss where natural evil comes from. So the first part of Theodicy, he looked at the moral evil, looking at the fall and free will. Now he tries to address where natural evil comes from. And natural evil is a part of the world that God created, according to Augustine. And humanity, the people of the world, um, call natural evil as being bad. Uh, so the reason for this is that we have limited understanding of what is happening, and we do not have the complete or the full picture of why natural evil is here. We don't fully understand, but there is a reason for it to be here, but we have limited understanding. We're unable to see the full picture. Only God sees the full picture. So to try and exemplify this and try and explain it further, he uses the color black as an example. On its own, as you can see the first illustration here, that picture is meaningless, where there is limited understanding of what's happening there. But once you combine the black with other colors, as you can see the second one and the third illustration here with the color, it becomes a bit more meaningful. So the black is really important within the two illustrations on the right. It has its reason to being there, but it helps us to gain a fuller picture of the picture and of human life. And then the last aspect of the theodicy is the idea of the cross overcoming or defeating evil. So it's also known as the Felix Culpa, the happy mistake, if you want, bringing good out of the evil. So obviously evil came into the world with the fall of Adam and Eve, taking the fruit from the tree. And this has led to all humans having fallen from the pedestal that we were supposed to be on. We have inherited the sins and the suffering from Adam and Eve. So that is where evil came into the world. But here is where Augustine tries to defend the all-loving God. He says that because God is so all-loving, omnibenevolent, he's given us a second chance, and he did send Jesus to the world to save us from our sins, and that is again showing how good God is. He's given us a second chance. We moved away from God from the original sin, the fall of Adam and Eve, and he's given us a second chance to try and come back to be nearer and closer to God. For those who have decided, using their free will again, to turn to God, and through Jesus they have gained forgiveness, and they will rejoin God again in heaven. So this is why the term forming, soul deciding has been given. It forms your soul, and it gives you a better relationship with God. So Augustine believed that the opportunity for humanity to find salvation, to be saved through Jesus, shows that he is merciful, he is just. So remember these when it comes to evaluating, and he's all loving as well, because he's a good God, because he's given us a second chance, and he's given us a chance from moving from bad and evil back into good. So why do we suffer then, according to Augustine? The first idea is the idea of inheriting the sins and the suffering from Adam and Eve. So according to Augustine, people deserve to suffer as we are still being punished for the original sin of Adam and Eve, taking the fruit from the tree. We have all descended from Adam and Eve, therefore we have inherited the punishment. And secondly, the idea of free will. People continue to do bad things through their free will. So moral evil is humanity's responsibility. It's not God's fault. People have created it. So let's look back at the question that we showed at the beginning of the presentation, explain how Augustinian type theodicies offer a solution to the problem of evil. These are the main points that you would actually include in an answer on this question. The idea of soul deciding theodicy, the idea of free will, and the fall of mankind, the idea of privation, the idea of the absence of good. His ideas of natural evil, it's our lack of understanding or limited understanding of the full picture, what's going on. And then the idea of the cross defeating evil, a loving God giving us a second chance, and then the reasons why we suffer as a punishment we've inherited from bad deeds. As a punishment that we've inherited from Adam and Eve, and the idea that it's people's bad deeds, bad actions through free will in the world today that causes evil and suffering. So let's move on. We've looked at the theodicy. Within the course, within the specification, there are two topics that you need to try and evaluate based on the Augustine theodicy. The first one being trying to actually evaluate if the theodicy is still relevant in the 21st century. So I've tried to set them out in short form for you. They're a summary of the main arguments that you could give. First of all, the relevant arguments that you could include. So if you believe that the fall of mankind, Adam and Eve, the temptation, taking the fruit from the tree, if this is history, it actually happened, then you would see that the theodicy is relevant. It's based on a historical fact, and therefore it is of relevance in the modern world. And also, if you think that the crucifixion, where Jesus dies on the cross, sacrifices himself for the forgiveness of others, so that we can reconcile our relationship with God. If you think that that did happen, it is historically correct, then the Augustinian theodicy is relevant because it's based on those two events in history. The irrelevant discussions or arguments that you could actually include are in come under two different titles. So there are logical problems with some of the theodicy, some aspects of the theodicy. The first one would be that perfection cannot change. So according to Augustine, it was a perfect world from the beginning. Well, if it was a perfect world, then the fall would not have happened. So how can a perfect world be less than perfect? So the fall of mankind through Adam and Eve and the angels disobeying God would not have happened. So is oh, God is omniscient. Sorry, my line is gone over the world. So God is omniscient. He would know beforehand. So he's all knowing. So he would know beforehand that angels and people would turn against him and humans would cause the fall of mankind and human suffering. So God should take some of the blame for the existence of evil. So it doesn't actually totally defend God. He should take some blame for evil and suffering. Next, why did humanity need knowledge of good and evil and free will if the world was supposed to be perfect? If the world was perfect and good, we didn't need to know the knowledge of differences between good and evil, and we didn't need free will. Hell is part of the order of creation. This suggests that the existence of evil is part of the order of creation, and God has prepared a place in order to punish and make people suffer. It does make you question why an all-loving and forgiving God would do this. And angels, the idea that angels would rebel against God, this suggests that there are flaws, there are mistakes in the creation of angels. Why would they rebel against God if the world was a perfect world? So those are the logical problems, things that don't make sense within the theodicy for people in the modern world. And then you could move on to looking at the historical and the scientific problems that come out from the theodicy in the present century. So if the narrative in Genesis of the creation, the fall of Adam and Eve and the fall of mankind, if it's not true and it's not history, as we mentioned in the this bit, so if you don't believe that this actually happened, then the theodicy, this part of the theodicy, is based on nothing more than a myth. So the argument on the defense of God is actually based on a myth, something that did not happen. Therefore, it's not persuasive and it's not relevant. Second, the Augustine's theodicy does not match to our experience of evil. This addresses the privation aspect of his theodicy. The deprivation or the privation, the absence of good, is what we call evil. Saying that there is no evil doesn't really help us when we actually it's not meaningful when we actually can see evil and suffering and we suffer ourselves in the world. Moving on, the idea that human beings deserve to be punished because they are descendants of Adam is biologically impossible. You cannot inherit sin biologically. So again, science would say that that part of theodicy doesn't work. Next aspect is the concept of a perfect world becoming imperfect. It contradicts with what science says. According to science, if you're aware of the theory of the Big Bang theory and evolution, the world started after the Big Bang. It was totally chaotic. It was full of chaos. And through a period of time, it settled down and became a better place to live, and there was more design seen in the world. So through evolution and natural selection, the world becomes more perfect from a chaotic world at the beginning. Well, that contradicts what Augustine says in his Theodicy. He suggests that the world was perfect, and then through Adam and Eve and the fall of mankind, it became more chaotic or less perfect. So they contradict. Science and Augustine actually contradict the order of the creation of the world and the perfectedness. Next point, many people would doubt the existence of the devil, as God created everything. The devil should be under God's control. If he's created everything and nothing existed before God created them, he must have created the devil. So if God allows the devil to do evil, God is partly responsible for evil and suffering. God has allowed it to happen. Remember that a theodicy tries to defend God in the face of evil and suffering. Well, in this bit, you have to actually blame God. Some of the blame has to be on God because he has allowed the devil to show evil and suffering in the world, and to allow it to happen. And lastly, an almighty and perfect good God would want to create a world that is perfect without evil. So those are some of the arguments that you could include in an evaluation question on this topic. And the second evaluation on this topic, on the Augustine's Theodicy, is to what extent does the Theodicy succeed in defending the God of classical theism? So again, to what extent? You need to evaluate, does he succeed or does he not succeed in defending the classical theistic God. So the God of classical theism is the God you would find in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The Almighty God, the omniscient, all-loving, forgiving, a just, a good God, and the Creator God, examples of the nature of the classical theistic God. So again, you need to try and see what characteristics Augustine actually succeeds in defending. So the idea of privation, so we're looking at his success. I would say he succeeds in defending the classical theistic God. The idea of privation as evil being the absence of good. A loving God has not created evil or suffering. It's the absence of God's goodness. So again, that defends the good God, the just God. People and angels have created evil and suffering, not God. So again, it defends God. There, he is a good God. It's the doings of people. That's why we suffer, and that's why evil is in the world. But you could actually try and see the weakness in this argument and just say that, well, God created people and angels, therefore he must take some of the blame for evil and suffering, because he's given us the free will for us to actually suffer because of the consequences of our free will. God did not want people to abuse their free will, so that is his intention. He wants people, his intention was that people would be good so that they would reach heaven. So he is a good God deep down. He's a just and a fair God. He must, if he's a fair God, he must punish people who have misused free will. Good people must be rewarded and bad people should be punished. That is what's fair. So therefore, he is a fair God. Again, you could show the weakness of this argument and you could question, but some of his characteristics is that he's all loving and forgiving. Then why has he actually created hell and punishing people forever in hell. And lastly, a loving God, an omnibenevolent God. God has given us a second chance to be reconciled with God through the cross. So again, trying to defend God as an all-loving God, giving us a second chance to turn to Jesus and to be forgiven and gain place in heaven and come closer back to God. Where he does not succeed, you could have a look at science. Science, first of all, it's not biologically possible for you to inherit people's sins. Blaming on Adam and Eve for evil today doesn't work. The creator God, if God has created everything, it is God who has created evil and suffering through angels and free will, so he must take some of the blame. God, again, as a creator, he's created the devil. So basically, God has created evil because he's allowed the devil to work in the world. He is all-knowing, he's omniscient. He must have known beforehand that angels would rebel and humans would cause the fall of mankind. So he should take some of the blame. If he's a perfect and a good God, he would have created a perfect world without evil and suffering. An all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving God would be able to think of an alternative way of, and a more loving way of testing humanity without causing suffering to his humanity, to his people. And lastly, why would an all-loving God create hell for an eternal punishment? Again, that doesn't seem to go well in defending the all-loving God. So those are some of the arguments you could include on this evaluation topic. So that's an example from the examining board of an essay question on the Augustinian type theodicies. They solve the problem of evil. So those are some of the arguments that you could include in the evaluation on this topic. So as part of your revision on the Augustinian Theodicy, why don't you create a mind map trying to summarize the main points of the Theodicy. So you could actually copy or use this as a template, or you could actually just print this out and actually try and fill some of the titles here with your explanations. So first of all, within the Theodicy, you've got the first part of the Theodicy, the fall, linking to free will and explaining free will and the idea that we have inherited the evil and suffering from Adam and Eve. The second part of the Theodicy, looking at privation, the evil and suffering being the absence of good. And the third part of the Theodicy, looking at the cross, the loving aspect of God, giving us a second chance to actually get closer to him through following and turning to Jesus. So that's the Theodicy. And then you could pick some of the arguments for the evaluation, looking at the strengths of the Theodicy in general and some of the weaknesses, and you could actually list them for your evaluation questions. And there we are. We have gone through the Augustinian Theodicy. If you want to read through the specification once again, you hopefully will have understood the main aspects of what the specification is asking you to understand and be able to explain. So you have the main ideas within the Theodicy. Over here, there we are. And then you have the challenges, which from there onwards is your evaluations. So I hope that this has been of some help for you. It's a basic look at the Theodicy and trying to help you to evaluate with the main arguments for your evaluations of the Augustinian Theodicy. I hope it's been of some help for you in your revision.